Hello, everyone. This is Padma Kuppa, State Representative for Troy and Clawson, Michigan's 41st House District. As you know, I very much am deeply rooted in my faith and have always been an activist. My faith has served as a call to action. And so that is probably one of the reasons that I am now the state representative for the 41st District for Troy and Clawson, Michigan. I have with me here someone who is also deeply rooted in faith. In fact, she's a doctor of faith. She's a doctor of theology, a doctor of ministry, Sabrina Dent. Welcome to Faith and Politics, policy that puts people first.
Thank you so much.
And I'd like you to just, in your own words, share with our listeners and those who are watching, because this is one of those unusual opportunities where our guest at Faith in Politics is on camera. It is lovely to see you, Dr. Dent, and welcome to Faith in Politics. Please tell our listeners a little bit about yourself.
Representative Kuppa, thank you so much for having me on your podcast today. I'm really excited. It's always a pleasure to see you and to speak with you. And so, as you shared, my name is Dr. Sabrina Dent, and I do have a doctorate of ministry. So my focus in my work has been around bridging the gap between race and interfaith relations. And I incorporated that in a lot of my work in talking about religious freedom. Who I am is I'm a native of Petersburg, Virginia, and the daughter of Larry and Thurdale Dent. My dad was a Pentecostal preacher, so faith has always been a part of my life and my makeup. And it's so funny that I'm doing this recording today because today is my father's birthday. And so he played a very critical role in the formation of my faith and who I am today. And so I look forward to sharing more about that as we engage in this discussion.
That is fascinating. I too am very much shaped by my father in my faith. My birthday was earlier this week.
Happy birthday.
But my father also, because I grew up in the United States and growing up, I was probably the only brown girl in my classroom. And it was really hard not to be invisible. And so I learned, even though I was a bookworm and rather quiet and very much interested in math, and reading, those were the two favorite subjects, I ended up studying to be an engineer and then somehow or other, this concept of faith, it was a call to action for me. And so through my father's sort of teachings and my mother's practice of bhakti and devotion, I ended up always being an activist and eventually a community leader that eventually ran for office. And here I am. So just tell me what brought you into this space of activism, because I know that you also have that core of wanting to do good in the world. And that's what faith is about.
Yes, that's a great question. So, as I mentioned, my father was a Pentecostal preacher growing up, and I always saw my dad. My dad was also an entrepreneur and a business person, and so he would often travel here to the nation's capital and really spend time doing business and engaging people. But whenever my dad saw someone that was in need, he would always ask them what they needed and he would reach out to them and show. And so one of the lessons that I learned from my dad is to take care of community, to take care of others. And my mom also modeled that. My parents were people that cared about others, and it was also embedded in the culture of like our church. I grew up in the Black church, the Black Pentecostal church to be specific. And so there was always a element of care and concern, even if it was expressed in different ways from how other communities might express it. But one of the things that was a critical moment in my life is after I graduated from college, and I was a Girl Scout growing up. So that was also
Me too. Me too.
And my mom was my Girl Scout leader. She was over the Girl Scouts at one point. But so helping others has always been a part of the fabric of our lives, and just even what I saw modeled in my extended family. But what really shaped me even more is after I graduated from college. I used to go volunteer. I signed up to volunteer at a women's shelter. And one of the things that was important to me, because of the work that I did, I was in property management at the time, and I worked with people that, had reached a certain status in their lives and they were able to afford luxury housing. And so I wanted to volunteer in a space where people appreciated the simple things in life. And I'm not saying people that have luxury do not appreciate things, but it was a different space when you're seeing women trying to take care of their children. And so that led me on a path of more volunteer work, and even being a mentor to a young girl whose mother had been diagnosed with AIDS. And so later on in my life, and I'm still young, but I'm saying in my career from from that time, that I ended up working at a domestic violence shelter. And I was the children's program director. And one of the things that was important to me is it came at a critical time in my life. So it also came at the time that I accepted my call to ministry. I always knew that I was called to do something greater in service to humanity. I didn't know what that was. And I eventually went to seminary, but at the time I was taking a few classes at New York Theological Seminary, but there was a critical time in my call to ministry where I had the opportunity to go from being a volunteer to working one day a week. And there's a very long story behind that. And one day we could sit down and talk about the long story that led me to this point. But the church leaders basically said, well, you have to be the one day a week where I had the opportunity to answer the hotline to help women that were in crisis. And that one day a week was on Sunday. And so being a part of the Christian tradition at that time, it was important that you're in church. That's the emphasis. You're on church on Sundays. And so it was like, well, you're a lay minister in training, and so you need to be here at the church. And I had this conversation about, and I was married at the time. I said, what if ministry is answering the phone to ensure that someone has safety and a place to go? And so I took that chance and took the job. And this was just one day a week that I was answering the phone, but that prioritized some things in my life and shifted a lot of things for me. And so that led me on a path to being more of an activist, because when people are relying on you as a stranger to provide safety and hope and access to resources and information that you need to either get your life back on track or to help your children, it takes you to a whole different place. And so that was the critical thing that shaped me to be the advocate that I am now, not to mention my own lived experiences, because when you've had some lived experiences, that even propels you to do work more justly for those that are on the margins in life, no matter what they look like and no matter where they came from. At some point in life, everyone has a struggle. And so that was a critical moment for me in my life. And then after that, I ended up, going to South Africa for a while and spending time on a sabbatical to really think through some things. And after that, when I came back, it was confirmed that my next move was to go to seminary and to figure out, what does ministry look like for me? And that's very interesting too, because seminaries aren't in the past, like, and even still now, some seminaries are not equipped to prepare people for non-traditional ministry contacts. They think of it as you go into the church and you do the traditional ministry or Christian education. And I knew that wasn't my path, but I knew I was called to do something greater.
It's interesting when you talk about that, because for me, yoga or union with God, as Hindus seek, because it is by discovering the divine within that we peel off the layers and discover God and the beauty and the joy of being, one with our divine presence, and that is in each of us. And it's really interesting because we can do that in the Hindu tradition. In the Bhagavad Gita, one of my favorite Hindu texts that I read from, they say the highest form of union with God is ahimsa, or nonviolence, but then there are many others. And one of them is karma yoga, which is what I've always seen, the yoga of action, where you serve the other. It's probably one of the reasons, switching from the Hindu scripture to the Christian scripture. One of my favorites is the Gospel of Mark, although Gospel of Luke and Gospel of Mark talk about the widow's offering and how Jesus observed that the widow's offering was more than her fair share. I know that Pope Francis said, faced with the needs of others, we are called to deprive ourselves of essential things, not only the superfluous. We are called to give the necessary time, as you did by taking your Sunday and answering the calls. And so we're called to give immediately and unconditionally some of our talent. What do you think it means to do one's fair share and distribute resources fairly? Because I really think, especially some of the policies that I encounter about bail, about penalizing people, putting them in jail because they don't have enough money to pay a ticket, right? And what do you do? How do you interpret these scriptures, and what does it mean for people to do their fair share, and what does it mean for us as a society through legislation to distribute resources fairly?
Ooh, Padma, that's a loaded question right there. And the thing is, it shouldn't be, right? It shouldn't be difficult to respond to that, because here's the thing. Everyone doing their fair share is everyone doing a part to help society succeed and to thrive, right? And so, one of the things that I learned, this is very interesting. At some point in my life, I mentioned before that I was married, and I was married to a Catholic, and so we would go to mass, and the priest would talk about, what they meant by tithe, and it was like everyone gave this percentage of their income, and whatever I think it was at that place, I think they talked about the wage per week. And so I was like, whoa, that's a very interesting way of thinking it. And tithing has always been a part of the tradition that I'm a part of or grew up in. And so, it's like giving back to the community, giving back to your house of worship. What does it mean to give, to take care of those that do not have all the resources that they need? And so, in terms of public policy, it concerns me when I see that those that are already on the margins of life get taxed even more. And so when you mentioned bail, I immediately thought about Khalif Browder's story, and the young man in New York who ended up as a teenager in Rikers Island because he was accused of something, and his mother didn't have the money to bail him out. And so her child ended up going to jail and ended up in Rikers. And ultimately, Khalif Browder was released, but unfortunately, his story ended sadly because he took his own life. But what does it mean if families had the resources to take care of their families and their needs? So, and talking about policy, and I don't want to get political, right? But I want to talk about policy. I think about the eviction moratorium that happened, and how the eviction moratorium helped a lot of people, because when you think about what was happening during COVID, you had the essential workers were mostly, if they weren't in the medical field, they were low-wage workers. They were the people that still had to show up at their job, that didn't have the liberty of saying, I want to take a paid day off, or I want to do X, Y, and Z. They didn't have that liberty. Some of them may not have had the resources for their children to really even engage in online learning the way in which some schools had rolled that out. So there are multiple layers that come to this issue. But going back to the eviction moratorium, it helped a lot of people. And still, the fact that we're still in the midst of a pandemic, and that there are a lot of things, there's a snowball effect of what is happening. showed me like this is an opportunity, which I felt like the current presidential administration, the Biden administration, was smart in thinking about this in terms of addressing child poverty, right? It's like when you think about, most people care about children. And I'm saying most because not everybody cares about children. Let's be real, but most people care about children. So if you think about addressing this issue in terms of addressing child poverty, means that in order for you to address child poverty, that means that you need to provide resources and things for the family. So it's like you're providing wraparound services to address the issue. And so I think in terms of public policy, more people need to look at this in terms of what is in the best interest and the well-being for children and for that are that are currently here, that are in, and also in the next generation, right? It has to be a matter of not just saying we support life at this stage, but then once children are here, no matter how they got here, once children are here, then to not prioritize them and the people that care for them. Because I personally know a situation of a mother who had to make some decisions about her family. And as a result of that decision, she then was ordered by the court to do certain things where there were transportation challenges, there were child care challenges. And what does that do? That then put that mom back in a situation of being incarcerated again because they violated the terms of whatever the court stated. The problem with that is the courts need to reimagine how things are being done. And also looking at to whom they are being done, right? So it's like knowing that there were lots of people in the Black community that were arrested under like certain policies from previous administrations, people that served time for marijuana, and now marijuana is legalized. And not only is it legalized, but people are making a profit off of it. Corporations are making profits off of it. So when you look at it, it's like you have to look at public policy in terms of like, what is the greater good for humanity, for everyone to thrive and move forward? And so people paying their fair share is not, it does not look like corporations getting tax breaks. It does not look like the wealthy being able to hide their money. It's also thinking about the fact that, you know, most recently millionaires spent money to be the first to say they went into space, right? And it's like, how much of those resources could have been used to help other families that are in need? Here's something else. Why does it take a long time to vote for a $15 per hour wage for people when they need it the most? Like, but then other issues can pop up. So it's like, again, I'm not trying to politicize things, but one of the things that I unfortunately saw is that the eviction moratorium and what happened during COVID was politicized. And that's a problem because then it's contradictory to what some politicians say, say to get the votes from their constituents, and then don't care about their constituents once they're in a place of power and privilege.
Thank you so much for, but one thing I just want to call is politics is about serving people. I mean, the government exists for public safety and welfare. And so this is why I think legislation and policies that support people, and especially it's America's promise that you can work hard and you can get out of poverty, right? And that's what I see not happening. And I want to just hone in on one of those things that you talked about children in poverty. And that issue is really important to me, especially recently, because the governor of Michigan took about $1.4 billion of the federal relief funds recently and wants to expand eligibility for subsidized childcare so that people who are in the poverty level of from $39,300 annually to expand it to 200% of the poverty level. So that would bring so many children out of poverty, right? And by increasing access to low or no cost childcare, 150,000 more Michigan children would be able to be put in childcare, and their parents could go to work. So that way they could, go bring home the money, work, as we all want to work and take care of our children. And I think that is really an amazing idea. And so just talking about women and being able to lift the voices of the struggles that women face is really important to me. And it's really amazing to have faith leaders like yourself who can do that, and to have, governors like Gretchen Whitmer who can do that, or even legislators like myself. But a lot of my time in the legislature, I recognize that nobody who looks like me has ever served in the legislature in Michigan before. I'm the first Hindu, I'm the first Indian immigrant, the first brown woman. I find this, when I get into an elevator, people don't always recognize that I'm a state rep. And I see when they see what we imagine a legislator to look like, a traditional white male, that there's so much more deference when somebody sees them. And so just how do you handle that? Because this is something that we can try to fix it through policies like equal pay, making sure that we recognize we really need to do that right now, because a lot of the women who have taken leave of absence or who have stepped away from the workforce because of all the challenges during COVID, we're going to lose a lot of revenue. Billions of dollars of revenue when women aren't in the workforce. But honestly, the question of invisibility as a woman, and not, I was always taught that you had to have your voice. I grew up in American public schools, and America's promise was always that, you use your voice. That's what being in a democracy is. But do you ever get tired of always, because there are some phrases that people use around this, angry Black woman comes to mind. Yes. And how do we change? I don't think that's something that we can put into policy. Right. But what else from a faith perspective, how do you handle that?
Right. So, it's so funny because those things that you brought up are real, like the labels that are assigned to us when we use our voice and when we speak our truths, then we're considered either a threat, or we're then told that it's not what you think it is. Like, it's those things happen. And so in terms of my faith, one of the things that is so funny, because, like I said, today's my father's birthday, and I wrote a post on social media about him. And my dad used to always tell us, in the scripture, I can't tell you which scripture it is right now, but my dad used to always say, rebuke them sharply. My dad always reminded us that it's okay to use your voice and to state your concerns and to really help people correct themselves in terms of the misinformation. And so I do use my voice, and I do speak up often, and it does come at an emotional cost to me. And so I also am a strong believer in therapy and taking time to step back and to find the spaces in which I could be, but really just calling on my faith. One of the things that there's a scripture that whenever my dad would sign a letter, my dad would sign off this letter from the third epistle of John, the second verse, and it says, "Beloved, above all things, I wish that you prosper and be in good health, even as your soul prospers." And so it's this calling on remembering myself while I'm remembering others, and taking care of myself, and one, to thrive in life just as much as I want other people to thrive in life. And so I one of the things that I know about myself that consistently comes up every day in the work that I do is that I'm an advocate, and I can't stop speaking up. It's how I was raised. But I also recall as I told you, my dad was a Pentecostal preacher. So there are many scriptures that he reminded us of. And one of the things was that he would tell us to trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not to your own understanding, and in all of your ways acknowledge God, and God will direct your paths. And so that's from Proverbs 3 verses 5 and 6. And so I I try to follow spirit and to really listen to spirit and to, really know those times when spirit is pushing me to speak up. There are times when I do want to be silent, Padma, and I don't want to say anything. And I feel like this nudge. And I often say that my ancestors are with me, that, I am not just the daughter of Larry Dent, but Thordell Dent, as well as I remember my grandparents, Rebecca Fleming and Geraldine Dent. These were women who were strong women who used their voice and had to do what was necessary for them to move forward. My grandmother, Rebecca Fleming, was 9 years old when she was on her own. And so, and I should say this, my grandmother adopted my mom when she was 60 years old. So she was well seasoned in life, as I like to call it, well seasoned in life. But this is a woman who was a sharecropper and that, had was a daughter of sharecroppers and had this tenacity and this resilience. And I call on those things in those moments when it's difficult for me. But Pama, what I don't do is stop talking about my truths, my realities, and my experiences. I bring those to people's awareness to remind them that I am in the room. And if I'm in the room, you will listen to what I have to say and you will respect me in that space. And I'm going to do it respectfully, but I'm not going to allow you to discount any part of my being for the sake of your advancement. And so I think it's important for that to happen in all of our narratives telling, in all of our stories. And because if we don't speak up, that's how public policies get passed that diminish any part of our being. And so I think during this pandemic, I've probably like reached out to my representatives more times than not on many policies that, that are important to me, and including right now thinking about voter suppression and what has happened. And so it's like I always speak to the issues that impact my community, but also the people that I say that I love, my friends and, my family members. And and I say friends and family very broadly because I've adopted as you know, we have a mutual friend that is like my brother.
Yes, Dr. Murali Balaji, I'm very grateful that he connected us.
Yes.
I'm also very grateful that you reminded me one thing that I want to share with you is that one of my colleagues is a woman of color, Representative Felicia Braybeck, and she's a psychiatrist. And as soon as she came in, I knew that she would be an ally because one of the things, as you said about therapy, and I've discovered that actually one of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle was a farmer and almost tried to commit suicide, considered suicide. And so, mental health is real, and mental health and taking care of oneself. And so we are working on policy to support people to have access to mental health, because so often, not only do we have social stigmas attached, we don't have healthcare providers that make it easy to access mental health care. And I think that's easily one of the most important things that I am working on this term. So thank you for allowing me to share that. And Representative Felicia Braybeck, I hope that she and I are successful in partnering with people across the state, across the country, in improving access to mental health care, because I think this pandemic has left many of us needing care.
Absolutely. And I'm glad to hear that you all are prioritizing that. And at the same time, I'm glad that you called out the name of your colleague, because that's one of the things that helps me to also get through is I have a sister circle. I have women that I can call on and say, can we talk? Can we meet up for coffee in a very safe way right now in COVID, right? But it's important to have that sister circle. And one of those friends and allies for me has been Reverend Kristen Barrington, who I worked with when I was at my previous employer, the Religious Freedom Center. And we developed like this sisterhood because although, we look different, we had common experiences that brought us closer together. together. And I have many other sisters, like my BG LC sisters that, you know, at the Freedom Forum that I became in relationship with. But I think it's important to, as we take a step back, to breathe and everything, and we you have those mental health moments, that we also call on our girlfriends to be able to be ourselves. And with you being in public policy, in the public sphere, it's important more than ever that you have a safe space where you can go to and have those conversations.
Sure. Thank you so much for creating this safe space for us to have a conversation about faith and politics. I believe that I am now going to add you to my own sister circle, Dr. Dent, if I haven't already, as you
Yes.
probably know. And so I really appreciate you taking the time to be here with me and with our listeners on the podcast, Faith and Politics, policy that puts people first. Thank you so much.
Thank you.